Welcome back to Between Two Racks with the Kilo Crew. On today's episode, we're going to discuss the strength assessment workshop, the assessments, warm-up optimization, intro to nutrition periodization, and monitoring training load. So, let's kick it. So this past weekend, we hosted our first strength assessment workshop, also known as OTAs, for all of our long-term online training clients. To start the weekend, we did everybody's in-body assessment. So everyone arrived Saturday morning before we started. We took them through their in-body. Everyone had their results. And this is also for us to check in with our online clients. But not everyone that attended this weekend was necessarily an online client. So we also kind of provided an overview of how we like to use the in-body with our clients. I know a topic that always gets brought up during courses is in-body versus calipers. So I thought this would be a good topic to get us started today, as I'm sure a lot of our listeners also implement different type of body composition assessments within their practices.
Yeah, so in the past, we used to do calipers because the technology was not super advanced with other body fat modalities. But the last 10 years, we moved away from calipers and we used the InBody 570. Assuming you're doing it with consistent conditions at the same time of the day, and you're following all of the procedure to do it appropriately, it's quite accurate. The studies around the InBody 570 claims that it's plus or minus 2% accurate compared to DEXA. This might be not always fully accurate, but it doesn't matter because it still provides us with a consistent overview of body composition. But the advantage that we see with the InBody 570 as opposed to calipers is not only is the consistency better, not only is the actual reading of the body fat score more accurate to reality, but it also allows us to see way more different metrics that the caliper can't provide. And one of the problem with the caliper is not only do you need to be a skilled technician at taking the different skin fold, and the fatter a client is, or the more inflamed a client is, the harder it becomes to take appropriate skin fold thickness. So sometimes it can be very misleading. And also, a lot of the equations used to estimate body fats are very old and somewhat inappropriate with the population of today, which tends to store more body fat in the lower body than they used to in the 50s when some of these metrics were measured. So sometimes you read somebody through calipers and they score 16%, but visually they're more like a 30%. That's like the flaws of a lot of these equations. So at least the in-body is a little bit more accurate with the body fat score. But beyond this, what's really good with the in-body is it gives you a measure of visceral fat, which we know is more correlated to health. Like with a lot of our clients, we want them to be less than a 10 score on visceral fat, which tends to be a better marker for health purposes. If you're dealing with physique athlete, we know they need to be a 1 or 2 at most. So it's kind of a cool little feedback we get that we can't have with the caliper. Then it also shows like segmental lean analysis. So we're looking at the amount of muscle tissue the client has on each arms, for example, at the trunk, on each leg. So we're able to look at bilateral discrepancy in lean muscle mass, which sometimes can be correlated to potential injuries. Like if there's one limb that, like, let's say the upper body, one limb has 5% less muscle mass than the other limb, it might be an indication that there's something going on in that arm. So again, it's an interesting feedback that goes beyond body composition. Obviously, we look at the body fat percentage itself, the amount of body fat mass. There's lean body mass, there's total weight, there's extracellular and intracellular water ratio. So we're able to see if the client is well hydrated, or is there a tendency towards more inflammation because the client is retaining more fluid outside of the cell. A lot of feedback. And then my favorite metrics is SMM, skeletal muscle mass. So we're looking at the amount of like pure muscle mass in the body. So whenever you come up with a protocol or a nutrition plan that is geared towards fat loss, for example, and you see a drop in body fat mass, but you see either a stable SMM or a slight increase in SMM, then you know that the training plan and or nutrition plan is appropriate. You're going on the right track. So again, to me, it's just more cool information you're getting from your client that you can apply. There's limits, as always, but it's way easier and way less invasive to do an in-body check-in than to go do a DEXA or MRI like twice a year or whatever.
I think clients too, like in terms of getting that sheet, like it's really powerful for them to see it and then to see the trends. Like if people can focus on the long-term trends, if you have like at least 4 or 5 readings and you can really see like any consistencies or if there's a one-off, we've all had the one-off where we're like, yeah, that's probably not accurate because maybe I ate something different, I'm retaining more water or whatever, but like it's easier to see what's going on with them.
I know, because a lot of coaches come and they all freak out saying that the InBody's not accurate, but I don't think a lot of them have gone through the training that InBody provides in controlling all of the testing parameters. But then it's also, like we've been saying, it's so easy to implement. It's quick. So personally, what I've found is I do it multiple times a week in order to find those trends, and then I know when I have a one-off reading because I've done it enough and I know kind of where my numbers should be.
Because the numbers don't change drastically. And that was the one problem that we found with the calipers. I mean, just the user bias, like sometimes, like even if you're conscious of trying to be consistent, when you have the client in front of you and you're pinching, are you pinching exactly the same spot? You can really get like one-offs also with the calipers.
Yeah, like the downfall that the InBody isn't accurate, like compared to what? It's as accurate, if not more accurate than calipers.
But they don't realize they're inaccurately doing it with the calipers, and I think that's the issue.
But we're, like, especially you always bring up for physique competitors, you still like calipers and be under a certain total number for each reading. So they still have their use. It's just where and when.
Yeah, I mean, the advantage with the competitors, because at this point they're so lean, the inflammation is low, the skin is very easy to pull away from the muscular tissue. So it's very easy to take the skin fold. Now, although the equation, once you're this lean, is not super accurate in terms of a body fat score, like sometimes you take people on calipers and it's going to read like either non-available or 0.2% body fat, which is impossible. But at least you're looking at the sum of the skin fold as a absolute metric. So we know that when Alex competed, we knew that the total of her 10 skin fold had to be below 50 millimeters for her to be lean enough to step on stage and look the way she needed to look for the stage. So it's cool in that sense, but there's way too many flaws. And like I remember when I did my bachelor's degree in 1998, one of my courses, Luc Léger was the professor, and for the last 30 years when I was there, he used the students to do some type of testing of the 8 most popular skin fold equation at the time. So we had the Jackson-Pollock, the Dernan-Wormsley, the UAS, we had the Allen modified Zwerin. Like we had so many that we tried, and what was cool is we had clinics to learn how to take it appropriately. So we took a bazillion reading. We did it on each student, and each student did it on each student. And then each student went into a underwater hydrostatic weigh-in device. So we had the hydrostatic weigh-in measure, and then we compared all of the other skin fold equation to the underwater weigh-in. And the variance between equations was off the chains. Like the UAS would overestimate our group, our class, by over 13%. The Durnin would underestimate by about 6%. So it's just like the variability are so wide, so it depends on which equation you use. For example, African American have a higher bone density, while most of the equations were on Asians. So the bone density metric for the equation does not fit the African American, hence the reading will always be off. So it's, there's lots of flaws, and they're very old. Most of the equations are 50s, 60s, early 70s. So the people were different. People were much smaller, much leaner, not as much muscle mass. Bone density was greater. So anyways.
Yeah. I think it's also, one last thing on the InBody, it's far more empowering with clients to focus on things like the skeletal muscle mass and the visceral fat, to like drive them more and focus on those two, because we always want everyone to have more muscle, and then the visceral fat is so correlated to health that at least if you're focusing on those and they're not only just looking at like the number, body fat, and they see other things that can drive them more, I think that's more empowering than just having the body fat that you're looking at.
Yeah, and that's why it's called the skeletal muscle mass metric, because it does not consider water, unlike lean body mass. So if you have variance because of your diet, well, at least it's not affecting that reading.
With the calipers, are there certain sites that then, if you're doing someone's InBody and you just want to track measurements, that you would select to track?
I mean, I think of like Christian Maurice, one of our friends, like the way he uses the calipers. He does 10 skin folds, but he just he doesn't look at the percentage body fat. He just looks at how each skin fold varies from month to month or when. So, I mean, you can do all of them. You can do all 10 plus the InBody just to get more information, but a quick one is usually like the abdominal and then the suprailiac. That's usually gives you an overall idea of what's changing.
The two skin folds because there's only two really that's been shown through multiple studies to have a correlation, is the subscapular skin fold and the abdominal skin fold. So there is a correlation between abdominal skin fold and chronic cortisol output, and there is a correlation with the subscap skin fold and insulin response. But that's pretty much it. It really is just a correlation. It's not necessarily an indication of true hormonal status, but it gives you some type of quick overview of what might be going on. Whereas the suprailiac is good too, but that's more of a measure of nutrition-based fat gain, which, I mean, it's always related to nutrition, but what I mean, it's not necessarily a hormonal disruption that leads to a gain of suprailiac fat. It's just like you ate crappy for a while, you gain some fat. This skin fold is going to readily show, unlike the calf skin fold, which might not correlate really quickly to how you're eating right now.
Okay, so we started the weekend off with the InBody assessments. We reviewed it as a group, and then we went into Porrick's lecture on warm-up optimization. This was one, personally, I was also really excited for, because warm-ups, we always say it's the thing you get into the gym. Alex is really good at doing them, but you don't always want to take yourself through them. So Porrick went through research and really thought through practically then how students can apply the warm-ups. So before I turn it over to you, Porrick, I did also want to bring up that how we're going to implement this into courses next year. So during all of our courses next year, we're always going to take the groups through the warm-up to just kind of reinforce the importance of warm-up and just get everyone moving before the specific training session. So Porrick.
So warm-ups are a really funny thing, because they've been completely overhyped and they've been completely disregarded all at the same time. Yep. So you have these groups of people that'll be spending 45 minutes on a warm-up, and then there's other people who will say that they're completely useless. Just go in and start training and it'll naturally happen. And with pretty much everything, it's somewhere in the middle. Like, so went through all the research. Research is all over the place. Very little research directly between resistance training and warming up. Most of it's more about a performance outcome with the warm up instead of straight up resistance training. But overall, it found that there's generally beneficial outcomes from performing warm ups. Then we discussed the whys, the mechanisms, and how that's best achieved. But then where I think warm-ups really have the most impact is the long-term outcomes that you can gain from it. And some of the studies that we went through and showed like drastic long-term benefits from the introduction of warm-up. So while you can get the exact same physiological benefits for that upcoming training session by just going in and doing a few warm-up sets and getting moving, that's fine. You will get as good a training session as you would with a very specific thorough warm-up. Long term, you're missing out on this dedicated training time to address weaknesses you may have, movement limitations, other qualities that you would like to train or would like to maintain while that are not getting specific training time within the training session. So from that then we start devising our own warm-ups and trying to hit the big rocks that we know will be very beneficial as a totality to get ready for a training session. But then we also know some movement patterns that we generally don't give a lot of time and training energy to within the training session. So like a couple examples is like thoracic rotation. We never train through thoracic rotation. It's just something that's not massively loadable. It's not something that we're going to spend a ton of time on, but it's very important for upper body mobility, shoulder health. So we still want that dynamic mobility. We still want to be able to get in and out of those ranges. So we're going to include that in the warm-up. Things like a ladder lunge or Cossack squat, we personally don't program it. Not an overly loadable exercise, but it's a great movement pattern to be able to go through. We want the dynamic flexibility to get in and out of those ranges. Just because we don't want to load it doesn't mean it isn't something that doesn't have its time and its place. So warm-up would be a great option for there. So we start using the warm-up as a very good opportunity to train some of these, or train is probably the wrong word, but go through these movement patterns to maintain that ability, increase that ability, and try and improve overall movement ability throughout time. And then we went further and got into power specific warm-ups, like the very similar to warm-up that me and you went through. Went through the specific warm-up for sessions depending on the intensity of the upcoming session. So like a lot of the people currently talking about warm-ups, because it has been a topic that's somewhat resurfaced lately, it's always in like everything in strength training at the minute is very hypertrophy biased warm-up talks. So again, it's people most likely going into very not motor skill driven exercises, so very machine based simple exercises, or even if it's just a bench press, like it's not a very technical thing on a motor skill demand. But the higher the motor skill demand, the more important the specific warm is going to be, the more neurological demand. So either increased speed of contraction or increased intensity in terms of 1RM, the more important the specific warm-up is going to be. So we broke all that down and give very specific guidelines to how we would recommend warming up for those specific sessions.
And even going back to how you brought up like the lateral lunges and the Cossack squats, a lot of the attendees during the weekend, like we took them through it on Saturday, on Sunday, they were like, I think I'm sore from those in the warm-ups, just because, again, you're not going through those movements.
And funny enough, most of them haven't went through those movements and they really struggle to get through those movements, because any range that you don't physically bring yourself through, there is a possibility that you lose access to that range. So we want to try and keep moving through loads of different movement patterns just to maintain the ability to get there.
I know during your lecture there was, based on everything you did the research, and then when you built the specific warm-up, well, the general warm-ups, when you specifically went through all the exercises, you focused more on dynamic stretching, dynamic movements in that. But I did like what you brought up with the static stretching, because a lot of people think of warm-ups and their mind kind of goes to static stretching sometimes. So I like how you implemented that into the warm-up as well.
Yeah, so like the research has been very negative about static stretching over the years with performance impairment. It doesn't decrease injury risk, doesn't decrease soreness. But with static stretching, there is certain muscle groups that just respond better to static stretching because it's very hard to stretch them dynamically. And it's very easy to negate the negative side of static stretching. All you have to do is incorporate it into a full warm-up, have dynamic stretching after it, aerobic activity prior to it. Like it only takes a few steps. So if, say, for the internal and external rotators of the hip, very, very hard to truly stretch these dynamically. So one thing we did was we incorporated it into the general warm-up after a couple of the drills. So the core temperature, muscular temperature had increased a bit because that's when you get more out of your static stretching when you have a slightly higher temperature. But we incorporated there, held the stretches 30 to 60 seconds because it's, again, research backs up that if it's held for no more than 60 seconds, you're going to really limit the negative impact. But then after that, we are going to do a couple of lift-offs. So really, truly like owning that new range that we've stretched into. So try and create as much tension as possible and then continue on with the rest of the dynamic warm-up. So you're going to further negate any of the potential negative effects because you're still going through the dynamic stretching.
What was super interesting to me in your presentation in regards to the general warm-up is the main objective of the general warm-up is to increase core temperature, because as the body is warmer, like there's less viscosity in the tissue, so movement is easier. And I like that you're, instead of just going on a bike in a single plane on motion to elevate the body temperature, you have that sequence of dynamic movement that elevates the temperature, but that's something very specific. But to get back to that increase in core temperature, my favorite data was when you showed that study that demonstrated that for every degree Celsius increase in core temperature, there was a 4% increase in explosive power. That's significant.
So counter movement jump increased by 4.2 to 4.4% per degree Celsius increase in core muscular temperature.
And then there was a limit to that, right?
Yeah, there's physiological limits, but no one's really going to be in that position.
And then the other really cool element, so you have the general warm-up, but the general warm-up is kind of like to prep the specific warm-up. And the specific warm-up is really, really important. And what I like is that Verkhoshansky data about you're doing this to leave traces in the nervous system of what you're trying to accomplish specifically with your compound multi-joint primary movement. So that's why you're talking about the amplitude of movement, the velocity of movement, the approximate load of that movement. Because once you warm it up in a progressive manner, it leaves traces to the brain, which then makes it easier to access the proper mode unit when you're doing your actual workload.
Yeah, 100%. That was like my favorite point of the whole presentation. Like obviously the implementation and everything is going to be more important for everyone because it just gives it to them. But if they're going to take one other thing outside that they have to remember is the traces element. So to really be mindful of exactly how you're performing each movement within that specific warm-up. So you're going to leave those specific traces. So once you get into your workout, your central nervous system knows exactly what's expected of it. It is now more efficient at going through that range of motion, going through and creating as much concentric speed as possible. So it's just a very, very simple thing that most people fuck up.
Yeah.
And I think as trainers, like we only have an hour with our clients, and people like to, and if your client is late, people tend to skip the warm up, or you're like, I don't want to spend so much time. But like, I really think your client will benefit more from having a warm up, and at least like as soon as they get into their session, so they do the general, hopefully they can do it on their own, but if they can't, like still spend some time with your client warming them up, because they'll have a better session. Even if you have to do less sets, I think, especially the older people. I mean, I remember when I was like in my 20s and 30s.
Depending on the client.
Yeah, but you would still want, like, you'll have a better session even if it's shorter.
Well, that was another one of the points that within the first 3 to 5 minutes is a rapid increase in core muscular temperature, and it sort of plateaus out after 10 minutes. So we're not talking about a massive length of time. And if you teach the client good habits early on when you're training them, which if you're just starting out with a client, you should be at least starting them with slightly lower volume. Yeah. So your full training session shouldn't be taking an hour anyway. So you've got that 10 to 15 minutes to dedicate to warm up, so they really understand what they need to do. So going forward, as more volume increases and they need to dedicate more time with you to the actual training session, they should at least know and be proficient at performing the warm-up themselves.
I was going to say the exact same point, because even like the average length of my training session are 52 minutes.
Exactly.
So when you're starting with a novice, minimum effective dose, like the training doesn't need to be 52 minutes. In fact, if you load properly as a coach, your novice will be smoked by minute 40, 45 anyways. So you have enough time to do the general and the specific warm-up with the client within that 60-minute window anyways.
100%.
Yeah, for sure.
So training is all about quality. It's not about just filling the blanks of a 60-minute time frame with a bunch of random bullshit.
Yeah. And they're going to get way more out of it if you're teaching these good habits early and improving their movement patterns early, because there's going to lead to longer-term success.
Even the trainers there, after the general warm-up, they're like, whew, am I done? So clients do the same thing.
The freak, I suck with the name of these things, but the
inchworm to frog
inchworm to world's greatest, man, like after that sequence, like it takes me 2 minutes to get my air back.
If your core temperature isn't high before you get that one, it's going to be high after.
I like just to reinforce. So for us, there's always the general warm-up where we're talking about going through a warm-up with movements that aren't part of the training session, and then the specific warm-up being the warm-up on that A series. But again, this was an important point you made, that the A series of the specific warm-up, we're talking about the primary compound movements. Yep. So in some cases where you have the training sessions where your remedials are becoming the A series because of you working with that client, then if your primary compound movements are in the B series, then you have them implement the specific warm-up in the B series.
Yeah, so they go through their general warm-up, they perform their remedials as their A exercise, then once they're finished with their A series with remedials, then you go in, start your specific warm-up for the primary compound movement of that day, and then get into your B series.
I don't want to get into all the specifics of the specific warm-up, but just if you want to kind of choose a couple of like maybe 12 plus reps and then maybe going down to like 6 and 8, just so listeners understand.
All right, so the specific warm-up is very much built in terms of what is pretty much the minimum effective dose to get you truly prepared for the upcoming session. And what the big takeaway is the less neurologically demanding, the less specific warm-up you need. So if you're performing more than 12 reps, so you're performing with 70% or less, or most likely less, one warm-up set's going to be enough. So if you do one warm-up set at about 75% of your starting load, you're good to go. If you're performing between 9 and 12 reps, still not very neurologically demanding, but want a little more rehearsal. There is a little more neurological output. So then I would introduce a second specific warm-up set. So in this circumstance, you do warm-up set 1, 6 reps, 50% of your starting load. Warm-up set 2, 4 reps, 75% of your starting load. And then start training. After that, we keep introducing more and more warm-up sets. And then as we get higher in intensities, we'll sometimes work up to a true potentiator set where we're going to do our last warm set at the starting load or slightly above the starting load to create a post-activation potentiation effect.
Yeah. I think the specific warm-ups for me is something that I kind of, for a while in my training, I didn't think specifically about the percentages I was throwing on the bar. I was always just like 10s, 25s. Like I just threw it on like that. But then when I finally made the adjustment and I was selecting like what I should be based on the load, it makes a big difference in activating your nervous system to be ready for the load you're going to do.
Yeah. But now on the flip side of that, some of the trainees over the weekend, I seen like, their first set was meant to be at 130. It's okay to do 135. It's okay to put the 45s on, make your life a little easier. Exactly. I just wouldn't be like, once I would be keeping it within 10 pounds. Yeah. I wouldn't be jumping further than 10 pounds outside of where you're meant to be.
Yeah. Do you have anything else on warm-ups that you would like to touch on?
Oh, that was pretty thorough.
I know, because there's a lot of things that come into mind, but I'm like, we can't give it all to a long podcast. It doesn't work like that. Okay, and then after the warm-up, we brought them into the gym, took them through the warm-up, and then we started with the PRIMEIGHT analysis. So with the PRIMEIGHT analysis, we really wanted to focus and ensure that all the attendees understood proper form through all of the PRIMEIGHT exercises. So we ended up putting 70%, like we had them warm up and then it was just 70% and then reps at that load.
Yeah, I mean, at that level, if we want to look at their technique, we need to see them do the movement under load. And not just like 30% of 1RM. Like it needs to be a load that's challenging enough so that you can actually see compensations and breakdowns. So why we chose 70% is because it's the minimum load threshold for strength development. So it's like heavy enough to see weaknesses, but not so heavy that you're draining the client over the course of the weekend assessing them. So that's why. So we looked at the 8 movements with 70% of 1RM, and we looked at limitations, like the major limitations that affect the motor pattern. And then we gave cues and tips to alleviate or correct these limitations.
With each of you, were there any common issues that you found that you saw more often with who was over the weekend?
Bracing was a big one for me. A lot of people just don't think of maintaining that tension in the core and the abs, keeping their ribs down. They just really try to compensate to get into a range of motion that they can't naturally get into. Yeah, but then that leads down to, injuries down the road. And
then that was kind of how all of you were kind of handling. I'll let you guys go into it after, but like it was kind of like an on-the-fly quick version of map assessment because, if they're...
It's like, you're doing this, let's adjust it, let's do this. Maybe you're not ready to do an overhead press. You're, whatever, you can't get to the range. Let's do this. Like, it's just... especially for trainers and people that we train necessarily online that we don't see, just to get that feedback that they normally don't get was really helpful.
So you was bracing within your group, Porrick. What was the big one with you?
Mine were drastically different, but my group had a drastically different training background when you look at them overall. Individually, so it's not actually surprising. So some were working around old sports injuries, some were working around years and years of different movement patterns, so it was very different.
That's true. If I think about
the actual people I was working with, so they're all very different. So all I tried to do was make them as proficient as possible in each movement pattern for what they had. So it wasn't like, it's just a bracing overall thing. It was just, what is your movement pattern? What's your limitation? How can I help you with that and implement that or give feedback to something they could do long term?
I heard you say this morning when you guys were discussing the weekend, and I thought it was really interesting. With one of your athletes, you said the difference in having individual heel platforms versus one made a big difference.
Yeah, so this particular trainee he squats with a decent amount of external rotation. So he sets up with his feet decently pointed out. So when you can use solo heel wedges there, I'm going to be able to match that heel elevation to where his foot's pointing. Whereas with the straight one, it's going to naturally make him want to go into pronation of the foot just to match where his foot is on a single wedge. So just doing that there, so the wedge is going in the same direction as his foot makes a huge difference.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and it's a simple change, and it won't affect a lot of people, because if you're within, like, he was definitely the more extreme side of external rotation. Anyone who's more like neutral, it's not going to be needed.
That's why coaches need coaches.
And Steph, with your group?
My group, there was two major things across the board, like a lot of hip restriction and very weak lower backs across the board.
I would say that was kind
Lower
of...
back too.
Yeah, lower back was an
course,
issue
yeah.
in a lot of people. Why do you think that is?
I honestly think that lower back used to be a thing that was like such a base. Like back in the days, people would good morning and do back extension and they will load the hell out of it. I think people are not doing as much direct back work, and when they do, they tend to underload it.
Abs, back is the new abs. Everyone
Yeah.
They don't want to
But
do
people
it.
don't train abs either.
Yeah.
So it's still abs is still the abs.
Because like a weak lower back on big lower body primary movements with actual load, when it's weak, like it doesn't lie. You see that the technical flaws like appear right away.
Well, and a lot of people complain about lower back pain.
But I think also as trainers, we always want to do like the big lifts, and we don't think that we need some of the remedial exercises for abs or lower back, so they don't do them. But yeah, sometimes you just have to go back to the basics and really like train those things and then build back up.
Yeah, the problem too is if all you do is squatting, but your lower back is a limiting factor, then you're underdeveloping your lower body because the lower back keeps limiting the amount of load you can actually use coming off the bottom.
Yeah, it's so interesting. What people end up avoiding, and then how it keeps creating issues for them, but they're not addressing it.
And that's the problem when you write your own programs.
Yeah.
Because you do, well, not everyone, but you tend to do what you like to do, as opposed to if you have someone else write your programs for you, they can be objective and then actually give you what you need.
But this was huge. But yes, I agree with you. But especially when you're working with online clients, it's hard to know the things that we saw over the weekend when you're training someone online.
Unless they're really good at sending you videos.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the problem too, because even like I look at loads and data a lot, but I need to readjust to the fact that coaching somebody online, you never have the same amount of feedback as coaching somebody one-on-one. So for example, I might be looking at somebody's horizontal back extension load and be like, okay, that's pretty good. But I'm not getting a video from it. It's just a horizontal back extension. I'm training a trainer. I'm assuming he knows what he's doing, so I'm not thinking about it. I'm like, oh, that's pretty good weight. Now you see that person do the horizontal back extension live, and then you notice that weight that you thought was good, instead of holding it onto their chest, they're holding it close to their belly button. So then you're like, oh, well, now the lever arm is so much shorter that load now means nothing. Yeah. But like, I didn't know that because I was assuming a certain thing. So yeah, there's so much that you can improve once you actually see the trainee train.
One last thing with the PRIMEIGHT analysis over the weekend that I thought was really cool was just the simple fact that we had two females that thought they couldn't do a chin-up, like genuinely had no idea they could do a chin-up. We had one, Sharon, who did it on camera when Steph was doing the chin-up progression. And then second, another female online client that popped out 3. And then she did her 1 RM with an additional 10 pounds and just had no idea she could do a chin-up.
Chin-up is so cool. Like, especially for women, like once they get that chin-up, it changes their whole perspective with training. And a lot of times it pulls it away from all the physique stuff. Women always want to work physique, but then they get into the strength part of it.
Yeah. Okay, so then we did the PRIMEIGHT analysis, broke for lunch, and then went into Intro to Nutrition Periodization with Alex. So originally, I kind of changed the title of your lecture once we sat through and listened through it. And I think this is something that a lot of our students and listeners will be very excited for, especially with our education next year, because this was kind of just like a little taste of what nutrition periodization is. But you didn't just go into that. You kind of broke it down and started with the important factors.
I mean, I started, the goal of that presentation was really to just have people think about nutrition like training, where you want to be able to change the way you eat, like that you're not locked into one system, like you're not only doing keto or you're not only carnivore. Like all these different plans are great as long as you can vary them. Just like your training, you wouldn't stick to the same thing the whole time. So we started with that, like just basically like trying to break down some of those like myths and stuff. And then once we got into the periodization, then we got into like how to adjust your overall goal for a macro, or how do we adjust the ratios in terms of protein, carb, fat with each accumulation or intensification. Why would we have more carbohydrates maybe in the accumulations and less in the intensifications? And then just giving them specific examples so that they can actually like work on their plan. So they had a worksheet at the end. We calculated their total daily energy expenditure. It's always a mouthful for me to say that word. And then how to split up, prioritize their protein, and then what you do with your fuel calories, how many carbs versus fat you should have based on what you're training, but also your personal preference and how you feel. Some people feel better if they have higher carbs, lower fat. And it's just how to manipulate that to really like optimize how they feel, their health, and their performance in the gym.
I think I really liked, and we know this, like we're very protein forward. Protein forward is very popular in the industry nowadays, but we looked on how much you needed. But my favorite part is we have that protein target. We're always striving. We need to hit our protein target. But then I liked how now then we're looking at the carbs and fats as the fuel. And I think that really goes into the individualization component and periodization, like you're saying, depending on the meso, the macro, like everything, but looking at it as fuel calories. Because I think some people, they don't think about it like that. And I think that helped some individuals be like, okay, I'm going to hit my protein, then these are my fuel calories.
Or they demonize the carbs, right? And it's like, although I'm not 100% like calories don't matter, but I'm also not like if it fits your macros or whatever, but like sometimes it's like most people should have some carbs at least sometimes in their diet, and they're scared that they're going to gain weight because they're eating carbs. But it's like, no, if you stay within a certain caloric level, then you can have all the play you want in your fuel calories and still get results that you want.
The one part that I really liked that I thought was interesting to me is for the student to understand that metabolic flexibility is a great goal to have. It's a great expression of metabolic health. So to be able to use fats as fuel when fat should be the predominant fuel, and being able to use carbohydrates as fuel when carbs should be the predominant fuel, I think it's a great thing. So the more you get your person to be able to have that flexibility in fuel choices, the better the training outcomes. So because we have periodized nutrition and we have periods where, okay, now we have to deal with more fats, and then now we have to deal with more carbohydrates, it makes it so that you're not creating any type of plateau or adaptation that will lead to long-term inability of being flexible through your fuel choices. So that's why I think it's good to not stick to the same thing forever, because it leads to issues. For example, keto might be great short term, but keto long term, we know that it decreases thyroid output. So long term, it's not a great thing, but short term, it has a ton of benefit. But as long as you can switch back and forth, and reap the benefits of it, I think it's the greatest position to be in.
And with your lecture, you kind of broke it down, like we were saying, you started with the calories in, calories out. You went into like the different ways to track, and then we went into the nutrition periodization. And as we get ready for next year's education, I know we were talking about it yesterday, we're going to provide the students with systems for nutrition the same way we do with training. Yeah. And so an important part of a system is tracking. But there are these steps you need to do before even start. Like,
you got to earn it.
Yeah, you're not going to play around with what you're having in an accumulation or intensification if you're not tracking and you have no idea where you're currently at with your calories, because you can't make those smaller manipulations if you haven't been doing something the same for so long.
Yeah, because the formulas are great. It gives you a starting point, but everybody is so individual. Yeah. So if you have a good base and you know that your client shows you that they can follow a plan, the same plan for 4 weeks. Yeah. If they can't even do that, you can't move on to the second step, is when you start to play with those things. So you got to...
I mean, I know with me personally right now, I've been tracking since we got back, and I've been increasing my calories, trying to find where something's going to change, and I'm now up like 300 calories from when I initially started 4 weeks ago, and my weight's still staying the same. Yep. Like my weight's the same. My body fat is decreasing a little bit, not at rapid, but I'm good where I'm at right now. So I'm trying to find that what's that?
Push it to the limit to where do you start to spill over and gain weight?
Yeah.
And then that's what your maintenance is. So now you really have the actual information.
And because I'm focusing on hypertrophy, that's why I'm driving those calories.
But it's so much like training, though. It's like you're saying, don't skip steps. It's like, if your squat looks like crap, I'm not going to prescribe squats with chains. Yes. You first need to learn to squat before you can use the chain. So it's the same thing here. You need to be consistent and understand food quantity. Be repetitive, and then let's add in some details.
And the importance of the biofeedback that you went over. So seeing how the client's feeling.
Yeah, how they feel, how they're sleeping, how their digestion is.
Their training.
Can you still improve? Do you have energy to train? Are you excited about training? If your diet is so not for you, and then you're depressed and you don't feel like training, well, this is not a good plan for you, even if it's good on paper.
And I think another part that came up a lot when we were just talking to people about the nutrition is when you're tracking, this made a big difference for me too, is then you're also looking, because I know you work with clients with nutrition online. Yes, you're looking at their individual days, but then on a weekly basis, you're looking on the average of that week, because that's more of what's going on than day to day. Because most people, it's going to be higher on the weekends. I plan for that. I know I'm going to be higher on the weekends, so I plan for it so it doesn't massively throw off my plan. And then even the days where we're training, my calories are higher because now I'm having my peri-workout nutrition, but I take into account all of those things.
Average. And then there's some clients, like you were saying, you're doing your in-body multiple times a week, but then you can see it with a client that weighs a certain amount or whatever on Friday, and then on Monday, it's completely off. And I'm like, all right, well, you might have lost weight by Friday, but then you gained actually more weight. And, I say weight, but, just body comp and stuff. But, the average is king.
But body weight is the same thing, too. It's way more accurate to have a weekly body weight average than a one-off reading. Like on a Tuesday, and then the next week is on a Wednesday, because you can't account for all of these day-to-day fluctuations in water weight.
Yeah. And I think we'll give out one little gem from your talk, because everyone always wants to know nutrition when it comes to fat loss. That's a very popular topic. So within the nutrition periodization, you touched on fat loss intensive nutrition, which is when we're doing the GBCs, the giant sets, so what we used to teach in the fat loss intensive, versus strength with fat loss goals. So if you kind of want to break down the differences of those two.
So if you're doing a 12-week intensive fat loss with GBCs, full body workouts, then we're creating a deficit with the training. So we actually want to match your calories. So we're actually going to increase your calories so that you can fuel your workouts. So we're really just trying to create a big flux in terms of we fuel you like an athlete, you train like an athlete, and you can have more output in your training. Versus if you're doing regular strength training, so now you're not really creating a deficit with your training, it's just your standard. Well, then now we want to play with a deficit with your calories. So nutrition has to be even more important because that's where we're creating the deficit from. I mean, you're still not and the deficit's always...
It's not like you have to drop 500 to get started.
You don't have to decrease 50% of your calories, minimum effective dose, not least effective dose. But you just start with maybe a 5% deficit. If you've never dieted before, 5% is probably going to be enough if you know what your actual starting calories are. Yeah. But some people who've dieted a lot, yo-yoed up and down with weight, they need a bigger deficit. So you could probably start with 20% there. So it depends on the person, but
yeah, I think it's
the whole fat loss intensive perspective. You need to look at it as a one step back to go two steps forward, because the training is so involving that if you do the training plus a deficit, that double progression is so much that you're going to crash before you even finish. So you need that fuel to truly create that output with the training and recover from that training so you can do it again. But why I like that approach, especially with Gen Pop, is once you lose the fat from an approach where the calories are still high and the training is doing the work, not only are you creating better habits of a healthy lifestyle of moving with the clients, but the likelihood that he maintains body weight, the new body weight after, is much higher, because you didn't go through this drastic reduction in intake from a food perspective. So the food kind of stays the same. So it's just, in my opinion, it's a much more effective long-term solution with these people. Mm-hmm. But once you're a black belt in dieting, then you can make super precise minuscule adjustments that 5-10% deficit, and really push your physique to those single digit numbers.
Yeah. I was okay, I have another thing, but I don't know if I want to keep giving out all the things. But I did think, just to kind of quickly go over just what you went over, we're not going to go into the details. Mm-hmm. So in the strength assessment workshop, in the intro to nutrition periodization, you broke it down by macro cycle goals. So it was the hypertrophy intensive, fat loss intensive, strength with hypertrophy, strength with fat loss, and power. So then we broke that down with what your energy input was. So is it maintenance? Is it plus 10%? Is it minus 5%? And then we broke it down for those fuel calories. So you always have your protein target, but then we broke it down for accumulation and intensification. Is it 50-50? Is it 50% fat? And that's from your remaining fuel calories after the protein. But there was a lot. I'm excited for people to be able to play with it, because I know I've been doing it for a while now, and then also further incorporate that into our education next year.
That'll be fun.
And then after the nutrition periodization, we got back into the gym, and then we went into the 1RM testing.
Yep.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, so the 1RM testing, so obviously we're looking at maximal strength. We did on big primary movements. We had the back squat, we had the chin up, the bench press. And then we used this not only to have an indication of max strength, but also to build a individualized 1RM continuum chart for us to better prescribe for our clients' individualities. So, for example, we know that generally speaking, on a multi-joint movement, 70% of 1RM, which is that minimum threshold, is 12 reps. But like I've learned from Ian King in the late 90s, the older you get in terms of training age, so the longest you've been training, the less amount of reps you will be able to perform at a given intensity. So basically, as coaches, we wanted to know with our clients, well, is client X still representing the general average? Is 70% of 1RM still 12 reps for this person on these moves, or somehow it's 8 reps? So a lot of my older clients, 70% is 8 reps, not 12. So now
they're like, woo!
Yeah, so for me now, I know that with their primary movements, the rep range for my A series is 1 to 8.
Yep.
And 8 is the new 70. It's not 12. So this to me is very helpful, because it would mean that if I don't have this information, every time I'm prescribing 12, it would be as if I'm prescribing them 50% of 1RM. So the actual intensity is nowhere near where it needs to be to get the strength response that I'm looking for.
Because we're moving along. So I do want to get into your lecture, Steph. You did monitoring training load. So I do want you to discuss that before we wrap up this episode.
Yeah. So while you're coaching your client, it's kind of important to see how much the workload of the programming. I'm not just talking about the weight on the barbell. I'm talking about the periodization model, the average intensity, the average volume, the frequency, the density, the training methods used, the modes of contractions used. So all of these things, how much it's affecting the client on the recovery perspective. So I presented the two main elements of athlete monitoring, which are external factors and internal factors. So we talked about the external factors being more related to the programming and periodization, so the actual training, whereas the internal factors are more of the physiological, psychological response from the training and the perception of the stress of the training via the athlete. So it's biofeedback from the athlete that you're using to monitor the training loads. So then we talked about the impact of volume, talked about the impact of density, talked about the impact of intensity and frequency and modes of contraction and what it can lead to on a training response perspective and what to watch for. Talked about tonnage, volume, load, how you should look at it, what's like a good average volume load that's expected, what is too much volume load on average, and you should be careful if you have too many sessions way above that threshold. So you look for things like that. And this is more on the external perspective. And then we also looked at the readiness survey questionnaire, which now this is cool because this is psycho-emotional feedback from the client in response to the training. So it helps me gauge, okay, well, now I need to ease back a little bit on the volume. Oh, now he's doing well, we can push back. So for example, the readiness score, we had one client present in the course that his average score for the last 12 weeks on a 1 to 5 scale was 4.4, which is very good. Yeah. Like you like most people will be the 3.4 to 3.6, which is good, but he's 4.4 average, really, really good. But what was interesting with him is in the last 12 weeks, his lowest score was 4.0 and his highest was 4.6. So he's extremely consistent. His sleep was always good. So this, for me, what it tells me is the last macro cycle worked perfectly for him. He could recover, and we saw it with his loads, okay? Because we also need, on the external load component, we need to look at strength performance outcome as well. So he keeps progressing in strength. Everything is good. So for me, I know I'm on the right path. I don't need to do anything else. On the flip side, there was another student that his average was 2.9. So, okay, so now there's something going on in his life. I know that, like, the business, stress at work, family, and all that kind of stuff. His sleep, he scored a 1 or 2 for the last 3 months. So now with this client, I can't keep pushing the volume. I might need to drop the volume, might need to change the training frequency, might need to change the training model and use a periodization model like daily undulating, for example, that will favor better recovery. So again, as a coach, if you have zero feedback, it's impossible to monitor training loads properly. And if you can monitor training loads properly, you can optimize the training response and the success of your client. And then another thing to look at that's linked to internal factors would be the perceived exertion of the training session. So was this like the most intense training session of all time? Was it super easy? Like where do you fit here? So if, for example, the client keeps for weeks on end, it's like maximal output every time. Well, now as a coach, I know that he's going to crash really soon. So I need to do something with the programming to ease up on the output that he's giving to each session because it's unsustainable. So to me, it's a very important facet of training. It's a young field. Athlete monitoring is a young field in our profession, but I think it's very interesting. And I think that for online coaching, even more so, because we don't have that day-to-day visual feedback. Like we don't see the way the client walks in the gym that can give you some clues.
Their output during the sessions, like so much of that.
Yeah, we don't know those things. Yeah. So the goal with my talk was to get the student/client to realize the importance of being accurate and consistent and the way they fill out these surveys.
Well, and we reinforced how important the communication is because we've updated our online services. So we're providing more to them, more hopefully information to help them deeply understand their programming. But if you're not hearing from them how they're feeling and you're only looking at Train Heroic and their sessions, you're still missing out on a lot. But hopefully, because I know it was the majority of the clients that were there didn't even fill out their readiness score in Train Heroic.
No, they did. It was only one who never filled it. They did, but the thing is, some of them they just did it like with no
intent. Like
no
there was
intent.
no,
it was
the same,
good.
Just,
I'm 3, but without real.
Yeah.
It needs to be as real as possible.
Yeah. I know on average when I do mine, I'm in that like 3.6, 3.8 is where I normally
so that's
am.
Good.
Yeah.
If your average was 5 all the time, I wouldn't that'd be weird. Okay. So 3.8 is good.
For the rest of the weekend, we'll kind of wrap this up. I just want to touch on the other things we did for the assessments. We did the eccentric tolerance, strength ratios, trunk strength endurance testing. So again, we had 4 attendees that were not online clients with us, but we do provide information like how they should interpret their results in order to further individualize their own programming and what they should focus on. But for our online clients, we collected all of the data, and now I heard you this morning discussing some of your clients. You are already making the adjustments based on the testing over the weekend.
Yeah, because it allowed me to cater the programming even more to their needs.
Yeah. And I think looking back on the weekend, as we're saying, we did the 1RM testing and all of these tests, we also had to make adjustments with the people in front of us because we had the back squat 1RM, but then we had some people that couldn't back squat, so we had to put them through another test.
That's coaching, right? Numbers. You always have to deal with whoever's in front of you, even if they're more advanced than you be.
Yeah. And what's interesting is because we had 2 people this weekend attend that were not coaches. They were simply clients in a different field. But I do think that the coaches that did attend also still walked away with a lot of stuff to be able to implement as coaches. So I thought that was a really unique extra benefit of the strength assessment workshop. Okay. So the next strength assessment workshop is January 25th to the 26th. So a great way to kind of get your year started with your training. We know everyone wants to start on January 1st, but that's never how it works. Yeah. So you can come to Kilo January 25th and 26th and get assessed by us. If you're training online with us, you have this as a benefit, so you join us. We will be launching our relaunching our online training, online coaching. We do online nutrition coaching with Alexandra as well. And if you work online with us for programming and you work with us nutrition, they communicate, so with the nutrition periodization, to manipulate what's going on there and also analyzing any biofeedback you're getting from clients. Steph, I know after the weekend you kind of had an overarching message that you wanted everyone to walk away with, and what you kind of came to this, but how important, the biggest part to long-term success.
It's in the detail. So there's lots of good training. There's a lot of different modalities and style and everything. But no matter what you do, no matter what you like, the more details you gather, and the more detailed you are with your exercise selection, parameters, training volume, and the more you can really be detailed and individualized, the better the results will be in the long run. And it's good to be basic and simple. That's fine, but it doesn't mean that as you're doing basic and simple, the details are not important. I mean, one of the reasons why Tom Brady is one of my favorite athletes, it's not because he's the most athletic. He clearly is not the most athletic. But Tom Brady would do the basics every day, repeat the basics every day, but he would do it with such details. Like I've trained a center that both played with Tom Brady and Peyton Manning. And he said that the big difference with these two quarterbacks that he'd never seen with any other quarterback that he played with in the NFL is how relentless they were at hitting every basic things with the highest level of details day in, day out, and repeat it so it becomes that second nature. So that bracing when you're squatting, it might seem like nothing, but it's a detail that makes a huge difference in your likelihood of having an injury and your potential of developing more strength. So learn to do it and repeat it and do it every day. You'll be better served. Intent and maximal concentric acceleration. It seems like nothing, but this details, as we know, if you do it and do it and do it in its second nature, and then you move on to a power phase, 37% more power without even doing power, just because you've done IMCA. So all these little things I'm a firm believer in, and that's why I think I've been successful with my athletes over the course of my career.
Yeah, I think that'll kind of be what the strength assessment workshop becomes, is like the long-term success is in the details. So reinforcing the things we kind of overlook, the general warm-ups, the specific warm-ups, all the nutrition pieces, monitoring load, watching all of those. So these weekends will kind of become those because they're coach-led. We keep calling it a workshop, not a seminar. So it's those practical details that need to still be reinforced with training. It's not just entering the gym
and just doing whatever,
and doing the workout. Okay.
Don't half-ass. Use your full ass.
See you next time, fam.